jumping off to admit more people if they're jumping in a bit late.
That's okay. It's all good. I know that it's a Saturday and people have all kinds of things they could be busy with today. So it's really amazing that you're making the time to be with us. Really appreciate it. This is such an important topic. And it is a topic and a health condition that is becoming an epidemic globally. And so we decided to do a 3-part series so that we could divide all the talking points that we wanted to share with everybody into 3 separate webinars. So hoping all of you will be able to join us for each of these webinars. It's going to be every Saturday. And I also want to thank Dr. Francois du Toit for hosting and for this joint collaboration. It's really a pleasure to be with you and, to learn from each other as well.
Isn't it fantastic? And I just wanted to say thank you for Chiarina, who was just mentioning to me, I sent the message to her privately instead of to the whole group. So everyone will be able to now see, they can contact us directly. So thank you, everyone. My name is Dr. Francois du Toit. I'm a registered naturopathic doctor or doctor of natural medicine, as I commonly describe to my South African patients. Me, myself, and Dr. Faryal Luhar are both naturopathic doctors. And one of the ways I always enjoy starting a discussion like this is just giving a little bit of an idea of where we're coming from. My road to health actually started because I was exceptionally ill growing up as a child. So I had chronic middle ear infections, severely bad, up until the age of 2 years old. And out of pure desperation, my mother took me to see a homeopath for the chronic middle infections because I was on antibiotics. I ended up in hospital. Nothing worked. And within 1 month of treating me by changing my diet and putting me on homeopathic remedies, I was cured. In 1 month, ear pain, mucus, all my energy came back. I was a vibrant, healthy child. And I've been much the same all the way through because it changed everything. It changed the way I lived. It changed the way my family looks at healthcare. We completely turned to natural medicine. And I couldn't be happier because it shifted the entire course of my life, because one of my passions is to help people to be the best health and at the best possible version of themselves they possibly can be. And then it drew me to want to help other people because I learned about the naturopathic medicine and the degree. And then I started to become a naturopathic doctor. And that's just my short version. But actually, I wanted to ask Dr. Faryal Luhar to mention to us what drew her to become a naturopathic doctor. This is a question I've been burning to ask for quite a while right now. So if you'd like to tell us.
Thanks for the question. So yes, unlike you, I wasn't a sick child, and I'm sorry that you had to suffer so much, but actually it makes you that much better of a doctor when you've been through something yourself and you found a resolution in a different way. Because you can speak from experience. I think with me, believe it or not, I knew that I wanted to be a doctor, and I went through all the schooling, and then just before I was going to really get into it after my first bachelor's degree, I just had a little bit of a disillusionment with the way things were going. I had many sick family members and they were on tons and tons of medications. And I just kept finding that they weren't recovering. They weren't getting better. They were just getting sicker and sicker, and they had to take more and more meds to deal with the side effects of the previous drugs. And I kept thinking something's not right. Like intuitively, I had a sense that there wasn't, a true sense of healing happening when they were using these types of conventional medicines. And please, everyone, note that I am absolutely not knocking conventional medicine. I think conventional medicine has its place. We need it. It's very important. They do a fantastic job when it comes to emergency medicine, surgeries, and so on. I've benefited myself when I needed help with some of my very serious health issues last year. But ultimately, I just had this intuition, and as the universe would have it, I ended up meeting a naturopathic doctor just randomly. He was one of the first doctors that graduated from the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine. And I had a conversation with him for an hour, and I was completely blown away, never turned back, applied, and that's been my journey. So I was lucky in the sense that I sort of just stumbled into it because I knew that there must be another way out there. There must be another path that we can take to truly reclaim our vitality and conquer our health issues. And I've been in practice now for 16 years in different countries, and I'm really blessed and privileged.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Faryal. I mean, you can never compare to when you've had that aha moments. I think most of us had that. For myself, I had to kind of like hear from my mother's experience and my dad's experience growing up. This is what it was for them. I'm fortunate in that sense that it's more difficult for me to relate in the sense because I have this unfair advantage. I grew up with natural medicine, so that's my life and
Right.
what I've always known. But it's been a humbling experience also being in practice for about 8 years to see this journey of my patients, see their struggles and relate to them. And I can honestly say it is a journey. It's a constant process. From day to day, we are learning more and we're experiencing deeper levels of wellness, of achieving also the thinking pattern that goes along with it. One of the things that I've mentioned quite frequently in these Zoom meetings has been that my first suggestion, my first recommendation to achieve optimal health isn't about the medicine, isn't so much about the diet, it's about changing your mindset. Because you have access to the best diet, the best doctors in the world, the best information in front of your screens. I mean, most of us are, I think the overall pattern is with the natural medicine doctors or even wider is to make content free and available. But we definitely want people to realize that it starts with a decision. It starts with by realizing your health is precious and it's in your control. You can always make a decision to improve your health. So I just always wanted to mention that. But
I think also, hopefully by the end of today's talk, we will empower people to make that decision, to have a change in their mindset and to start applying some of the things we're going to talk about over the next 3 webinars. So hopefully everyone who's on here with us is going to learn something new and something really empowering and start applying it. That's the goal.
That's right. Yes. No. And in fact, you have some slides, I believe you'd like to start showing us, and I'm going to just move over the privileges to you to start
All right.
sharing your screen. It should be up on your side right now.
Thank you. Okay. So please let me know if anybody cannot see the slides, if we have any issues with that. And my very capable partner in crime here will assist with that as I'm busy presenting. So basically, I just wanted to talk about this particular slide. What we're discussing today is the effects of having insulin resistance, which is the beginning of many, many problems. And the theme of the talk is the bitter truth about your sweet tooth. We all have a sweet tooth to a certain degree. I also have a sweet tooth, but I've learned to make healthier choices. And I think right now, with many of us in lockdown, our sweet tooth is taking over maybe in some ways because we want all of these comfort foods and we're giving ourselves permission to just go ahead and reach for anything, you know, we're able to do just in terms of whether it's stress eating, whether it's emotional eating, comfort foods. But we have to pay attention because, as I said, diabetes in particular is a growing problem. Francois, I just need to ask you, how do the screen is on my, the slide is on my screen. I just want to access some of the notes.
Oh, the notes are connected to the slide or a separate document?
Yeah, it's a separate document. I didn't want to.
Oh,
okay.
I think the easiest would be to Alt Tab or to just drag the window to the side, and then it will just minimize a little bit and open up some of the other windows there.
Okay, we'll just leave it as is because I think I'll end up exiting entirely the slideshow. So that's okay. We'll just go with it. So let's move on. Hopefully everyone can see the slide.
Oh,
what I wanted to do.
Perfect, yes.
Say that again?
Yes, I can see everything in terms of the slide.
Great.
Perfect, yeah.
Fantastic. So what I wanted to say here is this is going to just give us our objectives for this talk. And I wanted to just put some of the salient points down so that everybody can follow along. Obviously, we're going to talk about diabetes. What is diabetes? You know, why are the rates rising globally? And then if it is actually possible to reverse diabetes, because many of us have been, you know, made to believe that if you have a strong family history of diabetes, if you have been told that you have pre-diabetes, you're going to get diabetes, there's really no other way around it. And so you just have to kind of deal with it, and that's your destiny. And so hopefully by the end of this talk, between me and Francois, you'll be able to appreciate that we don't believe that this is your destiny. And yes, there are genetic predispositions, but you can actually influence the expression of how your genes manifest themselves, even if you have a susceptibility towards insulin resistance and diabetes. And there are DNA tests, by the way, that we can do to see this.
Yeah.
What is the role of insulin? What is insulin resistance exactly? So how does one actually acquire insulin resistance? And then we will discuss the naturopathic approach, which will include some of the very critical functional medicine type of tests and other approaches to deal with this. So,
Okay.
okay.
Wonderful that you mentioned about the genetics. I think one of the things that happens in the media and the news space is that they give us a very poor picture about genetics and illness. It's always about you have the bad genes and you get very sick.
Yes.
It couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, the science is so clear about this, is that your environment and your nutrition changes the expression of your genetics. That's a study field called nutrigenomics. And
Correct.
we understand it very well between me and Dr. Luhar, as well as even the field of epigenetics, how the expression of our genes manifests from generation to generation, which aren't even directly related to the physical pattern, but to the emotional patterns of and the traumas that our parents went through. So we understand this, but these things can change. The expression of our genes can change with all of these factors.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really important point because, you know, when you are born with a blueprint, that's exactly what it is. It's a blueprint that you've inherited, and you are the architect of how that blueprint is actually going to manifest. So please, if any of you either have diabetes or are close to getting it or have family members who've been told that, you know, you just have a strong family history, remember that your lifestyle, what you put into your body, what you're exposed to, the way you live, how you deal with stress, how you sleep, even your thoughts and your beliefs are really critical in terms of how genes express themselves. And there's a really powerful book that I'd like to mention if anybody wants to look into it. It's called The Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton, Dr. Bruce Lipton. Fantastic book. I must have read it 3 times already, and it's a pretty easy read, but every time I read it, I get new information, and I really recommend this book strongly for those of you who want to get into that. So this next slide, I hope you can see, is just a really fun painting. I wanted to start the presentation off in a bit of a fun way. You know, just bringing in some creativity, creative energy into it. So this is a painting that was done by Will Cotton, and there was an article written on this painting called Primal Pleasure and the Brutal History of Sugar. You can certainly look into it. But the main, you know, message from this painting is that sugar pervades almost every aspect of our existence. It influences so many aspects of the way that we live our lives. It's literally sprinkled everywhere in our life. So I just want the participants to think about this, right? Every time we want to talk in our language, we use it in our language. If we are wanting to refer to somebody in an affectionate way, you know, in an endearing way, whether it's someone you love or your significant other, what do we say? Sweetheart, right? We say honey. We say my sweetie pie, my cutie pie. These are all annotations of sweetness coming from sugar. If you want to talk about an enjoyable thing to do, or if you want to go out and have some fun, it's called a treat. If you want to discuss something that is like really cool, what, you know, for example, if somebody just bought a car and is showing it to his friends, what do the friends say? Wow, that's a really sweet ride. So we keep using this, you know, language of sweetness and, you know, in terms of being able to enjoy whatever is in our lives. And sugar is in every celebration practically, right? We have, can you imagine a birthday celebration, a wedding, a party of any kind without sweets, without pastries, desserts, cakes? So I just wanted us to just like look at the psychological aspect of how much sugar influences our lives. Okay, so that's something I wanted us to just think about, because this is why it is so addictive. You know, there are studies out there showing with rats that show that when rats have been separated into rats that are allowed to have cocaine and rats that are allowed to have sugar water, you know that both of those will actually trigger and stimulate that part of our brain that that is related to reward and pleasure, which is dopamine. And even the rats who are addicted to cocaine, if they have the choice of getting sugar water, they will switch and take the sugar. That's how addictive it is, and that's how frightening it is. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so let's talk about diabetes here. I hope everyone can see this slide. What is diabetes? Well, diabetes, in particular diabetes mellitus, refers to a group of metabolic disorders that results in chronic high blood sugar levels. This is the general accepted, understanding of what diabetes is, right? So we have type 1, we have type 2. I'm not going to talk too much about type 1 today. It is mostly autoimmune. And when we talk about diabetes, we are also talking about insulin, which is the hormone that is released from the pancreas. In type 1 diabetics, unfortunately, there's damage to what are called the beta cells of the pancreas, and they cannot release the insulin, or they release very little and it's completely ineffective, and so they need to take insulin injections conventionally. Type 2 diabetes, however, is something that people can basically almost eat their way into or live their way into, depending on their lifestyle. Everyone is producing the insulin, but over time, the insulin becomes ineffective. So you may have heard other terms like insulin resistance or pre-diabetes, right? When you're approaching diabetes, gestational diabetes, which is what happens to many pregnant women, during their trimesters. And then we're seeing more and more people and more adolescents, and actually more and more pediatric populations, children as young as 8 and 9 and 10 that are now dealing with diabetes, which is amazing. And we have to look at, where is this coming from? There's also a syndrome called metabolic syndrome, which is a cluster of different factors. So obesity, high levels of insulin, high blood pressure, cholesterol levels. And then there's a term where now we are seeing the relationship between overweight and obese individuals who also are getting this insulin resistance picture and diabetes, and it's now termed diabesity. Okay. So I just want to highlight, given the times that we're in, and it's been a stressful time for all of us, but we do know that during this COVID-19 pandemic, individuals with underlying diseases, in particular diabetes and heart disease, are having a tough time. They're having a difficult time if they contract the disease because of the mechanism of how the virus interacts with the host cells. And when you have diabetes or high blood pressure, heart disease, obesity, there are poorer outcomes because your immune function is already depleted, your inflammation is very high, and you're not able to actually deal with the virus. And so in future webinars, I'm going to go into this a little bit, but this was a reason for doing this webinar, is also to highlight that we really need to start paying attention to resolving any of these insulin resistance and diabetes conditions, because if we contract the virus, we will be in a better position to fight it. And so I really strongly encourage people to start making the changes, because the CDC is saying that between 50 and 70% of the global population is going to contract the virus. So the reality is, some of us may already have had coronavirus and resolved it and didn't even know that we had it. And some of us are yet to contract it. So what we want to do is equip our bodies with the best ammunition to deal with it. And I've done some sessions already discussing bolstering immune defenses, which you can find on YouTube, to help you to give your body what it needs to fight this. So we know that globally, the rates of diabetes are rising all over the world, whether it's in South Africa, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's India, Canada, the United States, Asia, all of these populations. It seems that diabetes is becoming more and more prevalent in all of these countries. So I just want to ask the question, why? Why is this happening? And, Dr. Francois, you can also jump in here from your experience. What do you think is going on? I've given you some clues on the slide there. But,
the slides are quite revealing.
Yeah. So these are just some factors, but these are, in my opinion, the biggest factors, right? With all of the advances in technology, all of the research that's going on, all of the money that's being pumped into research and coming up with new drugs and new medicines and new ways of treatment, why are the rates rising? And they're not rising minimally, they're rising exponentially. Why is this? We need to look at that. And so if I can just put it down to maybe three things, there are others, there are many different factors that contribute. Then the top three that I would look at, firstly being diet, of course, right? So, most of us, even populations that were eating natural produce from the earth, growing their own food, have now evolved into eating more of a Western diet, which is highly devoid of nutrients, unfortunately. And so there's an example of what your typical Western diet would be. And this is happening in all different countries in the world with many cultures who are used to eating and growing their own food, right? We're eating a lot of white foods, a lot of processed foods, a lot of sugars. And so when we talk about carbohydrates, we're eating a lot more carbohydrates than our ancestors used to eat. And we're eating a lot more sugar. I think Dr. Mark Hyman, who's very well known, I believe he has talked a lot on this topic, and he mentioned something like we are eating, 100 times more the flour and the sugar that our ancestors were eating 100 years ago. Not to mention the fact also that wheat, unfortunately, is not the wheat of our ancestors. We are eating wheat that has been hybridized so many times and genetically modified so many times that the gluten in the wheat is now very inflammatory. And this is a big part of the problem. So our diets are poor when it comes to nutrition. And this is one of the fundamental things that needs to change. And I just want to point out at this stage that I've had the privilege of walking many, many patients through completely reversing their diabetes, total reversal, just by doing some of these very fundamental lifestyle and dietary changes. I'm sure you've done the same, Dr. Francois. And we don't, as naturopathic doctors, we don't fix anybody. We don't heal anyone. You do all the work. We are just facilitators. We hold your hand and walk you through the journey, but you're the one that has to do all the hard work. And as Dr. Francois said, it all starts with making those decisions and making those choices. Sugary drinks are another one. If you talk about soft drinks, cool drinks, they're actually cheaper than water in some cases, which is pretty crazy. And then another factor is stress, right? So we can't escape stress. It's all around us. It's here to stay. We're dealing with it right now. And so it's not the stress that's an issue. It's the stressor, meaning that what to which we are responding or reacting to, that's the stressor. So for example, sitting in traffic, in rush hour traffic, when you're having to get somewhere and you're late, for one person could be a major stress because of the way they're perceiving the idea of being stuck in traffic. For another person, they may have a completely different response, and they might say, well, there's nothing I can do. They're just going to have to wait, and they can just play their music or listen to a podcast and make use of the time where they're stuck. Two completely different responses to the same stress. And what happens is when you are dealing with stress, we are releasing certain chemicals from our brain, from our body. A lot of these chemicals, these neurotransmitters that you will have heard of, epinephrine or adrenaline, norepinephrine, serotonin, actually, most of them are released right from the gut. So when we talk about, the relationship between the brain and the gut, we know the gut is the second brain. And just going back to the gut, it's really important here to mention the idea of what we call the microbiome. So this is the healthy bacteria, the beneficial, friendly flora, these little bugs that live inside of us, that have been with us since time immemorial. And they're like our little pets that live inside of us that we need to take care of and feed them and keep them happy, because they have very, very important jobs. The first job being that they help us to extract all of the nutrients from the foods that we're eating to ensure that those nutrients are being sent to the cells of our body to function properly. The second thing is that this is where 70 to 80% of our immune system resides. So all of those healthy bacteria are actually like soldiers of a military that stand together and keep all the bad guys away. Now, when we're eating a lot of sugar and a lot of processed, refined carbohydrates, unfortunately, we are feeding the populations of what could be called pathogenic, bad bacteria, and they can start to overcrowd the good guys. And then we have a lot of other problems from this. We have issues with digestive function. which then goes into things like your skin, your joints, your brain, and many other things. So the microbiome
You
is really
mentioned that, Dr.
important.
Luhar. You've really highlighted something that I've mentioned to my audience in a few of the discussions about the gut health and how it ties to everything, including it being the core of our immune system. About 80% of the lymphatic glands in our guts, that's tied definitely to the bacteria, is influencing our immune system from day to day. And in fact, tying
Sure.
back to the blood sugar control, there was a rat study that was done on obese mice, showing that when they transplanted the bacterial colony from obese mice to healthy lean mice with exactly the same diet, exactly the same amount of carbohydrates, exactly the same food, the lean mice rapidly became obese just from a change in terms of the bacterial colony in their gut. So this is where we talk about changing the gut flora or the microbiome has a rapid effect on the metabolism of foods, including carbohydrates, that can lead to weight gain and blood sugar problems.
Absolutely. And lots of studies are also showing us now that we've been able to note that the bacterial populations in individuals who are obese or diabetic or have other chronic conditions is completely different from the bacterial populations and the microbiome of healthy individuals. And they have a much less or lower diversity of the types of bacteria. We want our microbiome to look like an Amazon rainforest, in the sense that if you were to examine it, you have various different species of all the really good bacteria, because they all do different things. And so for obese individuals, for those with chronic health issues and diabetes, they have very, very few of these healthy bacteria and a lot more of the bad guys. And so these bad guys, as you just said, influence our choices of what we want to eat and actually send messages. There's a bi-directional pathway from the gut to the brain via a nerve called the vagus nerve. And so when we're eating a lot of these not so healthy foods, we are feeding the bad guys, who then send messages through this nerve back to the brain to give us cravings for more of the same.
That's exactly
Right?
true. Yeah, it's literally like your own microbiome is hijacking your nervous system, telling you what you should be eating. So it takes a complete
Exactly.
reset and initially quite a lot of dedication to recalibrate or change your gut flora.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so that's really important to appreciate, because of course a lot of us are like, oh, we just mindlessly eat, we know we're addicted to carbs. So this is going to help us understand why. And so we have to start changing the microbiome by eating the foods that are going to change those populations and diversity, and ultimately then have that connection with the brain. The last factor here is sleep. And sleep, I think for many of us, we just kind of think it's one of these, neutral activities, which it's not. There's so much happening during sleep in terms of repair and healing and replenishing. And it's been said through studies that if you have, deprived yourself with sleep deprivation of one night, it's like you've been eating junk food for 6 months. That's the level of insulin resistance that you will have with just one night of sleep deprivation. So it's really important to appreciate that deep sleep and good quality sleep, good sleep hygiene is really important. And we can talk about this some more, next time, or in a separate webinar, I think on webinar. So let's move on, because I don't want us to run out of time. And ask this question: is diabetes truly a blood sugar problem? Is it truly about high glucose levels? So the answer is kind of, but not really. The sugar problem or the high glucose levels are not the origin. They are the symptom. They are the end product of what is happening. And before you're diagnosed with elevated glucose, there's already lots of damage that's taken place before you get to that point. Okay, so the sugar elevation in your bloodstream when you go to get a fasting glucose test done, for example, is actually a symptom. It's a manifestation of something deeper. So I just want to, present a typical scenario. I'm sure this has happened to some of you. And so I have many patients who will find me for whatever reason, and they bring in some of their old tests, that they've had done over maybe 2 months or 3 months. And I will look at those reports and I will see that they have very high blood glucose levels, but they're not quite diabetic yet. And I'll ask the patient, okay, so what did your doctor say about this? And the patient will respond, well, my doctor just said, we're just going to wait until the levels rise further, and then he's going to give me medication. That's the typical approach, right? And then your medications are typical, you know, oral hypoglycemic agents to bring down the sugar levels. And if it's getting quite bad, then you might even need insulin injections. That's pretty much it. There's no discussion on diet. There's no discussion on lifestyle. It's a watch and wait approach. The naturopathic approach is completely different because we focus a lot on prevention. If I start to see that somebody's blood sugar levels are starting to grow high, I don't wait until they're in the range of being called a diabetic. I start treating it now, and we're not treating the sugar. We're treating the underlying issue as to why the sugar has been elevated. So I hope that's clear. And our first, you know, tools in our toolbox are going to be what is going into the body, how are things coming out of the body, how is this person sleeping, how are they managing stress, are they moving, is there any exercise, all of these factors. And then where needed, we'll use natural medicines to prevent further elevation of blood sugar levels and or to improve the sensitivity of their insulin. And then there are certain tests that we do that also give us a more holistic picture. So just a little snapshot here again of naturopathic medicine. So with myself, I'm Canadian trained. I studied at the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine and then practiced here for 10 years. And then I've had the privilege of practicing in the Dominican Republic, in South Africa for quite a few years. I still maintain a practice there in KZN. And in Dubai, I've been working in Dubai for the last 3 years, seeing many patients in the Middle East between Bahrain and Saudi and Dubai. And I've also been a visiting doctor in India. So we practice root cause medicine. We're always striving to figure out the root cause, the underlying contributing factors. Once you treat that, all of these other symptoms, which are messages that something's out of range, will hopefully fall into place. We do believe naturopathic medicine is one of these modalities that really aims at stimulating the body's innate ability to heal itself. So we're appealing to the body's own power to heal itself. We remove obstacles that are allowing us to cure ourselves. It also is very holistic, so it incorporates mental, emotional, spiritual, genetic, environmental aspects. And I always tell my patients I practice unconventional medicine because it's a completely different way of looking at health and disease. Did you want to add to that, Francois?
I think it's very important to realize, yes, we're always looking much more in terms of what is the quality of life and from day to day. And that you realize that there are so many factors that already are the warning lights that you are experiencing higher blood sugar levels, not just in terms of what you can measure in terms of your well-being. But it's one of the interesting things that I found is that most people only check their glucose levels, and then they might find that when their glucose level is high, that's the first sign, that's the first symptom, but they might not even check to what has been the drivers that go along with that. Or they might even have very normal glucose levels and never check the insulin level. I found that it's
correct, which is going to be very critical. Before I get into this slide, I think we're hearing some background noise. If I can just request all the participants to please remain muted, because we can hear conversations in the background if it's possible. And I'll just get into this next slide. So here we are talking about basically the role of insulin. So if you look at the little image I have on the left, it depicts what happens, right? We are eating carbohydrates. And when I say carbohydrates, I'm talking about all the stuff that is very, very pleasurable: cookies and pastries and muffins and cupcakes and bread and pizza and all of these lovely things that we love to eat, pasta. And we keep eating them, and then our blood sugar rises. And the reason that we end up having these blood sugar in the system is because these carbohydrates are being broken down into single glucose molecules. At this point, the brain sends a signal to the pancreas to say, hey, we've got all this sugar coming in. Can you please start releasing insulin? So insulin is released. It goes and grabs onto these glucose molecules. And if you look at the image on the right, you will see that there's a glucose channel on the cell. And that cell generally remains closed. And then there's a receptor, the blue one, for insulin. So when insulin comes in and docks into that receptor, that glucose channel then opens, allowing the glucose to enter the cell. And then the cell is able to use the glucose for fuel, which it needs. That's how it normally works. But over time, we continue to eat too many carbohydrates because a lot of us are having cereal and toast for breakfast, and then we're having sandwiches for lunch, and then we're having pasta for dinner. So it's just a huge overload of carbohydrates, and the pancreas struggles to keep up. And so over time, the insulin loses its effect, it loses its sensitivity, it becomes almost deaf. And so you end up having too much glucose circulating in the bloodstream. This is what is considered insulin resistance. The cells become resistant to the effects of insulin. And when you have extra glucose in the bloodstream, it gets stored as fat by the liver, and you end up with this abdominal fat. You end up with obesity if it's happening too much. And I'd like to point out that although people may think that obese individuals are eating a lot, and so that means that they're well nourished, they're actually malnourished because they're not getting the critical nutrients that they need. So diabesity, as I mentioned before, is combining the effects of obesity and insulin resistance together. And there's many things with inflammation and so on that then just kind of snowball. Remember also, for some of you who may have listened to me speak before, that I've spoken a lot about inflammation. And when you have fat cells, those fat cells are factories for producing more inflammation. And we know that many chronic diseases are actually inflammatory diseases. A lot of people with insulin resistance or blood sugar dysregulation will also have fatty liver. So many times on blood tests, if I start to see also that their liver enzymes are raised, or if they've done an ultrasound and we can see they have little bits of pockets of fat on their liver, right away I start thinking, is this person becoming insulin resistant? Okay, because it's a continuum. You don't become insulin resistant overnight. You don't become diabetic overnight. It happens over quite a period of time.
And that liver test is a very good point. And one of the areas that I've decided to spend most of the last 5 years of my research is into how the different effects of our environment and diet affects our cholesterol levels. And it's tremendously common that people that already have a long-standing history of blood sugar imbalances, that their cholesterol levels go out because of the effects it has directly on the liver. There's an almost direct correlation between the amount of highly processed sugars, especially highly processed fructose sugars, and the ability to increase the dangerous cholesterol levels, especially triglycerides. In fact, when we talk about fatty liver disease, that's mainly because of the rise in triglycerides and unhealthy fats directly related to a high sugar, especially high fructose. That's the sugar from fruits, and especially added in as an additional sweetener, very cheap sweetener in processed foods, causes damage, and that's invisible fat. Because some people always say, no, I must be overweight to have these problems that we're talking about. But no, it can be invisible. It can be the fatty liver accumulation affecting one of the organs that's essential for life, having to deal with all of the toxins in our environment, and then having to deal with all these high sugar levels at the same time.
So true. Yes, absolutely. So it's really important to also look at that and understand and appreciate how important and critical the liver is for so many things, because it basically is the gatekeeper, right? It decides what stays, it decides what leaves. And just on that point, Francois, I'm sure you can also touch on how, when we talk about cholesterol, there's this misconception that people who have heart disease, or who have atherosclerosis, it's coming from cholesterol. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I can talk about that for days. But to be honest, to summarize, most of us have been sold this lie that cholesterol causes heart disease, and that's a complete myth. In fact, one of the resources that I recommend to people is to go look at a book called The Big Fat Surprise by Nina Takeholtz. She's a female investigative journalist. She dedicated like 13 to 15 years of her life to study the original studies on heart disease. I mean, the original basic scientific articles, not the ones that were interpreted over and over and over again in unfortunately a biased fashion to show a specific point. And she's pointed out very accurately that cholesterol is not the cause of heart disease, just to summarize. But in fact, one of the drivers that causes dangerous cholesterol, because there is in fact some bad cholesterol and some good cholesterol, but not the ones you would think, not HDL, LDL necessarily. I can't go into that too much detail, but what they have found is that a damaged cholesterol damages your body. And one of the main things that damages your cholesterol, guess what? High sugar levels. High sugar levels causes oxygenation damage of the fats in your body. And then these circulating oxygenated or activated cholesterol then damages your blood vessels. So in fact,
Yes.
if there was a truer way of saying that, yes, cholesterol causes heart disease, yes, it may and can, but it's not the problem. It never has been, never will be. It's because of other factors that makes your cholesterol levels dangerous to your body. And in fact, glucose is the main one. In fact, they've repeated studies over and over, especially in Australia, to point out that you can find that the higher your sugar or insulin response is, the higher the prediction of your cardiovascular heart disease risk is, long before your cholesterol levels or any other factor actually points out to any problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So really important points. And as you said, we could talk about it for a long time, but this is one of the things that people need to start, just kind of opening up their minds to, is that glucose and sugars are the main initial contributing factor. So when we look at consequences of insulin resistance, if this is going on for quite a long time, the insulin in your body will start to rise. And so we always test fasting insulin, which is one of these tests that is not done frequently. And I test it in every single patient of mine, fasting insulin, because I don't know to what degree their insulin could be a problem depending on what they're coming in for. And so I do encourage everybody, make sure you're getting your fasting insulin tests done, because this can identify your cells. How resistant are they? How ineffective is the insulin, way before the glucose or the HbA1c levels rise. HbA1c, for those of you who are familiar, is basically looking at glycosylated hemoglobin, so how sticky your red blood cells are, and the fact that these red blood cells are then creating what are called glycation. There's lots of glycation. It's just creating stickiness, and it helps us to see what's happening with the blood sugar over a period of 3, maybe 4 months. So the higher the insulin, the worse the resistance. Now, as I said before, all of us might have some degree of insulin resistance because it's difficult to escape completely not eating certain carbohydrates and depending on our lifestyle. But we want to see how bad it is. And if it's quite bad, these are the downstream effects that we need to pay attention to. And they're really, really widespread effects of insulin resistance. It's not just diabetes. It's aging, so premature aging, wrinkles on the face. These are also glycation end products that end up appearing up on our faces, and we can start to prematurely age. I've got a nice little image there. Inflammation, big one. And so there's this term now called inflammaging, because it portrays the importance or the critical nature of how inflammation relates to aging, accelerated aging. Of course, abdominal weight gain is a big one. And then, as Dr. Francois mentioned, all of these cardiovascular issues are in some way or the other related to insulin resistance. There are circulatory issues. So we know that some of the complications of poorly treated diabetes is related to circulation. And so we can have issues with, paresthesias or tingling sensations. We have issues with our eyes and retinal problems. You can have issues with the kidneys, with blood not reaching the tips of our limbs. And so some people have had to have amputations. And these are all major complications. One of the things that I think is really important here for all the guys out there, erectile dysfunction. So we know that anybody who's a diabetic, who's a male, at some point in their life, being a diabetic as they get older, they will experience erectile dysfunction. So I don't know what's a greater motivation than that to get you to start getting your insulin and your blood sugar levels under control. Hormonal, we can have polycystic ovarian syndrome. We know that one of the main markers of PCOS can be high insulin. Infertility is also linked to insulin resistance, estrogen dominance, and even thyroid issues somehow directly are linked to insulin resistance. I mentioned previously the importance of the gut. There's so much going on with the gut, and we can get issues called leaky gut syndrome, where things are leaking out of the gut that shouldn't be leaking out, and then it becomes an inflammatory issue. And then the brain. Did you know that Alzheimer's is now being called diabetes type 3 because of the link to insulin resistance and blood sugar dysregulation? And there's some really interesting studies coming out now showing that people who have diabetes or who have obesity are actually more prone to having anxiety and depression. And then it's a vicious cycle. Cancer, of course, because of all of the oxidative stress, all of the inflammation. We know that cancer feeds on sugar. We know this. So this is really quite easy to understand.
Yeah,
And then a lot of immune
new
disturbances.
information to my audience. I haven't touched on this subject, but having seen so many cases of this in treating cancer patients, this is definitely true. The body becomes dependent on metabolizing sugar, and the cells are in fact specialized to burn sugar for fuel. So it's very true. Just wanted to affirm that to my audience. Thank you for highlighting that, Dr. Luhar.
Yeah, of course. And I'm sure there are others that I probably haven't mentioned here because these are the big ones. And so, you know, I'm hoping everyone's starting to think a little bit if any of these are an issue for them. Okay. I can't seem to get to the next slide. Oh, here we go. All right. So let me just make sure. Yeah. Let's move on to testing. This is so important. So we've already talked about how we as naturopathic doctors may request tests that are not typically done. And this is because it's holistic approach and we want to be able to see, get all the pieces of the puzzle. So depending on where you are in the world, you know, I've mentioned here what would be considered normal levels of fasting glucose. Now, fasting means that typically you haven't eaten for a minimum of 8 hours. And then you've gone and gotten these tests done. So if you haven't eaten, that means there shouldn't be too much sugar in the bloodstream, right? What's really interesting is that we are supposed to be eating less than or up to 6 or 7 teaspoons of sugar a day. We are eating upwards of 25 teaspoons a day, easily, all right? So we want to see how much glucose is circulating in the bloodstream when you haven't eaten. And if you're above these levels, even slightly, or you're starting to rise, we as naturopathic doctors will start to treat that right away. Of course, Francois, you talked about cholesterol and triglycerides and so on. There's a ratio here between your triglycerides and your high density lipoprotein, which should be somewhere around 1. That is typically considered healthy. Fasting insulin, again, if you've been fasting, there shouldn't be release of insulin from the pancreas because nothing's coming in as glucose. So if it is above 8 or above 48, depending on the units that your lab is using, then we need to try and figure out what's going on there. I talked about HbA1c. I just want to point out here that many of my patients have been told when they're coming to see me and their HbA1c is sitting at 8 and 9, that it's okay, it's fine, or 7. No, it's not fine. It needs to be below 5.5. So we work hard to get it below 5.5. And then I do check an inflammatory marker, CRP, because that gives me a sense of the degree of inflammation. There might be some other oral glucose tolerance tests where you drink a glucose mixture and test your glucose levels 2 hours later. We can also do insulin tests for this after, so fasting insulin, oral fast insulin tolerance tests where you're looking at how much insulin was released after taking in that mixture. But the one test that I think is really fantastic, and I do this for all of my patients, especially those who are showing these kinds of signs and symptoms, is something called HOMA-IR. This might be new for some of you, and you might have seen it on your blood requests and requisitions and reports and didn't know what it was. This is actually the most useful and the truest indicator of insulin resistance, because what it does is it looks at the extent, the severity of how bad the insulin resistance actually is. And it is a calculation that's done. So I've indicated what the calculation would be. It's basically multiplying your fasting insulin by your fasting glucose. Depending on the lab and where you are in the world, you would be dividing that by either 405 or 22.5. And you want that to be typically, around 1, maybe 1.5 or below. If it starts to creep up, upwards of 1.5 to maybe 2, 2.5, 3, then we have a problem. It's basically showing us on a sort of continuum how bad the insulin resistance is. I've had patients whose HOMA-IR is sitting at 6. So you can imagine how severe their insulin resistance is. So anybody can do this calculation. You just have to make sure that you are looking at the correct units, and your doctor can also help you with that. So I do encourage people checking their HOMA-IR, which means you have to do your fasting insulin and your fasting glucose tests.
It's important to mention that. I've always found it so interesting that you might check glucose level completely normal, insulin level through the roof, check insulin level completely normal, glucose level completely normal. So it's very important to check both. It's essential, in fact.
That's a great point. Yeah, because then you can actually see, you know, on that index, where are you with resistance, right? And hopefully nip it in the bud before it gets bad. And in particular, if you have these genetic SNPs, or what we call little mutations, variations on your genes related to inflammation and insulin resistance, it's even more important that you get this checked so that you can do something about it now. What's that saying about the, you know, the cure is better than there's a saying out there, I'm blanking out now, but it's better to prevent the disease than to have to deal with curing it afterwards. So that is our approach typically. And when we talk about naturopathic approaches, you know, here are some key ones that will be the beginning of what we do with most of our patients. I just want everyone to appreciate that naturopathic medicine is right at the cutting edge, in the sense that we are constantly learning ourselves. We're constantly keeping up to date with all of the new advancements that are coming out in our own fields. We do a lot of different kinds of advanced functional medicine tests that really help us to understand the toxicity level in a person's body, and, you know, whether they are deficient in certain nutrients, what's happening with their hormones, what's happening with their neurotransmitters. So it's quite fascinating, and that way you can get to the treatment. You can have targeted treatment. So as I mentioned, diet is number one. And if you look at one of the slides here where I've talked looking at diet, we want to eat whole produce. We want to eat as close to nature as possible, right? So what's the difference, if I were to ask, what is the difference between a banana and a banana muffin? Right? What's the difference? And one of my participants, Tasleem, thanks for mentioning prevention is better than cure. That's right. Two of you have said that. Thank you. Yeah, so whole produce, what do we mean by that? We mean, if you're eating a banana, that's how it came from nature. If you're eating a banana muffin, it's processed. It's got all the stuff we talked about before, all the refined carbohydrates, the flour, the wheat, the sugar, preservatives, additives. It probably doesn't even have true banana flavor in it. And so this is going to spike insulin levels, right? We want to focus on a lot of greens, a lot of the brightly colored, darkly colored vegetables and fruits. We want to focus on certain nuts and seeds. And I just want to mention here that in terms of diet, when it comes to diabetes, eating a high-fat, low-carb diet seems to be doing the best in terms of getting good results. So there are different types of diets. There's the paleo, there's, you know, the specific carbohydrate diet. The emphasis in all of these, the ketogenic, is about increasing your healthy fats and decreasing your carbs to a very minimal amount. And it has to be coming from complex carbs. So instead of a white potato, you could potentially eat maybe a sweet potato. Instead of white rice, you would have brown rice, that sort of thing. I don't know if you want to add to that, Francois.
Yes, I think one of the things that really transformed my entire view of diet and nutrition was with the Banting Revolution in South Africa. It was a wonderful springboard, but in fact, I'll be honest, I've moved completely away from the one-size-fits-all dietary approach. I never took it on myself, but within South Africa, what happened, most of us, of course, jumped on, and I was also an early adopter. In fact, within that first period of my practice, I started my practice in 2013. That's when I also started with the Banting diet approach with my patients. Now, I had a patient, and I won't mention, of course, his overall the history, but it was a man, I think it is 37-year-old, and he had the highest blood sugar glucose fasting level I've ever seen in my entire life. It was 17.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. His doctor said, you should be dead. And we changed him radically to the Banting diet. And within 1 month, his blood sugar stabilized to 6. Between 6 and 7.
Fantastic. So I just want to point out here that, so Banting, for those of you who are in other countries, is the equivalent of the ketogenic diet. And I just want to emphasize here that there is keto dirty and then there's keto clean. We have to make sure that we are eating healthy anti-inflammatory sources of healthy fats. And so those would be your raw nuts and seeds, olives, olive oil, coconut oil, you know, fatty fish, avocados, so on. So I just want to make that point, because a lot of people are eating whatever contains fat and thinking, oh yeah, it's ketogenic, and then they're not actually getting the benefit, and they could be creating more issues for themselves. And you're absolutely right. It is not a diet that is for everybody. It is something that may work for many people. In particular, I'm speaking in particular when it comes to diabetes and blood sugar dysregulation. And one of the participants here is saying that there is such a thing where there's no such thing as junk food. It's either junk or it's food. That's it. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me just see what else. I've got a couple of people here, Francois, who are trying to get in before I continue. But in any event, the other aspects that we look at in terms of the naturopathic approach, besides diet, is obviously eliminating the stuff that's making things worse. So we don't want to take in refined sugars. We don't want to take in refined carbohydrates. We got to eliminate all of those. And so when I'm working with patients who are looking to really reverse their diabetes, to be very honest, I don't even allow them to have fruit. I don't allow them to have fruit juices. I don't allow them to have fruits in the initial aspect of getting their blood sugar under control. Because at the end of the day, it is still a source of sugar. And although it may be a healthier source when you're eating the whole fruit, in the initial stages, depending on how bad or how severe the insulin resistance is, and if there are other complications, I actually remove that from their diet.
No,
Okay,
I follow
gotta
the
work.
same approach. It's a difficult one for people to realize that they're taking away.
Yeah, you got to work with your doctor, and hopefully a naturopathic doctor or a functional medicine doctor to basically customize the protocol to you. There are some very powerful culinary herbs and spices that we can use. I'm just going to mention two of them. Cinnamon, big one, and with herbs and spices, and also all of your produce, please make sure that it's organic wherever possible. This is so important because we don't want people taking in, when it comes to produce, things that have been sprayed with herbicides and pesticides. When it comes to animal produce, that those livestock or poultry or whatever that have not been allowed to sort of graze freely, that they're being force-fed grains, that they're being injected with hormones and antibiotics, because then we take all of that into our bodies and then we wonder why we're sick. So the same goes for spices. Make sure as much as possible that they're organic, that they haven't been irradiated, they haven't been sprayed with pesticides. And when it comes to cinnamon, everybody could be benefiting from at least 2 teaspoons of cinnamon a day. And this is really powerful, especially for blood sugar regulation. Turmeric is another one because of its anti-inflammatory effects. So I would combine that in a drink together with some hot water, you know, a couple teaspoons of cinnamon and turmeric, and maybe some lemon. We have a raised hand here. I don't know what that's about. If you have a question, please go ahead and type it.
I really people have some questions, things that because I added you to the host for the sharing, there's some people there that have queries. You could always move me back to the host so I can take over on that side.
Certainly, I'll do that. I believe this is anyway the last slide. I just want to, let me just point out 1 or 2 other things here, which is obviously movement. Gotta move. We are meant to move. The body is a machine. We cannot be sedentary. This is only going to make things worse. And I think right now, with a lot of us working from home, it's happening more and more. Right now, I just want to point out, with all of my online consultations that I'm doing and this presentation, I'm standing for the whole thing. Standing desk, right? One of the easiest things you can do to just make sure that you're engaging your muscles. Gotta really get onto some mindfulness practices, try to lower the stress hormones, try to, you know, ensure that you are breathing properly, and anything that helps you to feel calm and joy. Those are things we should be doing every day. So those are just some tips that I think people can start to apply. Please change your oils, get an oil change. If you're using any hydrogenated oils, vegetable oils, that's the first thing you can change, and start using good quality oils. So whether it's coconut, grass-fed butter, ghee, olive oil, which you shouldn't be using at high temperature cooking, you know, sesame seed, whatever. And the other thing is getting rid of, I think, all of the white sugar, white flour, that sort of thing. So we will continue to give you more and more tips as we go through the next 2 webinars. And of course, Francois, you can certainly add your feedback. I'm just going to pass the privileges on to you and stop sharing the screen.
Thank you so much. Some people have been asking for contact details. So I'm just sending those through as of this moment, as well as I'll be sharing yours as well. There we go.
Yeah, so I think the last slide is just my contact details, which I can go back to.
Yes, I've posted it in the chat box area for everyone to get a hold of us as well.
So yeah, I think, are there any questions that we can maybe quickly answer?
I had a wonderful question coming from the audience member about the testing prices. These do differ from laboratory to laboratory, but if you're looking only at the fasting insulin and the fasting glucose, you shouldn't get away with much more between 200 or 300 Rand, and that's already on the pricey side. These are tests that are done frequently, and then already you get a wonderful picture of what is happening there. So thank you so much, everyone. I think we should round off. Many people are asking that they need to be on their way. I will be making this video online soon, loading it up onto my Facebook page. I realized some of the people weren't able to watch the live streaming because we were shifting the hosting privileges between me and Dr. Luhar. So apologies about that. We will fix that problem for the next meeting we're doing next week, Saturday. And we will be discussing separate topics on each of them. This is really an introduction in sorts already, and with hopefully giving a wonderful insight on how much control you have over your own health, especially your own blood sugar levels. But it's such a much wider topic, isn't it? So thank you so much for giving us a wonderful part of your Saturday evening. And we really appreciate you. We'll stay in contact. And if you have a contact details up there, you'll be able to find me and Dr. Luhar online. We're both on Facebook. And but you're always welcome to reach out to us if you have any concerns and any feedback. We'd be very happy to take your questions and answers in a future upcoming session. But thank you for your time, and I think we should wrap it up there, Dr. Luhar.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I also want to thank everyone for coming. This video, we will upload it, I believe, onto YouTube. So if you joined late or you weren't able to get in for some reason, we will certainly be able to watch it on YouTube in a couple of days. So just watch out for that. And I wish everybody a fantastic rest of their weekend. Thank you, Dr. Francois. It's been super.
Thank you so much. And we should mention we're all both available online for consultations during this period. We've been doing it for many years, and you, Dr. Luhar, have been doing it for many more. So thank you so much, everyone. We will be able to assist you even during this lockdown period.
Great.
All right. You're welcome to end the meeting there.
I'm going to have to end it. Okay, yeah, awesome. Yeah, I'll end the meeting. And I also I just wanted to say that please, everybody, pass on the word, spread the word. We're going to be joining the same channel, same time next Saturday. We'd love to see you. We're going to get into things a little bit more deeper into what is happening when we talk about insulin resistance, some of the mental and emotional health aspects of it. And we're going to continue to give you some more tips from a naturopathic perspective on how you can live your most optimal life. So we'll wrap it up and end it there, and we'll see you next Saturday. Bye, everyone.
Cheers, everyone.